All right. Well, it's time for another Reltio community show. It feels like it's been a few weeks since we've done some of these. We will start pushing these out on the calendar, as you'll see here in a minute. As we're ramping up more and more community shows now that vacation is over for almost everyone. So on today's community show, building an MDM practice, harnessing the momentum to evolve. This is kind of a part 2-ish 3, right, Chris? Chris has done this once already, just on how to build an MDM practice from ground up. If you want to see that, just let me know. It is out on the community.reltio.com today. Today we have Chris Iloff. He's the Director of Customer Success. He's going to provide some experience that he's really kind of been through on building MDM practices. And I'm Chris Detzel. I'm the Director of Customer Community and Engagement. Before we do get started, we have some rules. Please keep your self on mute as usual. All questions should be asked in chat, or feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask. We will make sure to answer those questions. The show will be recorded and posted to the Reltio community as usual, and definitely will have it up by the end of this week. And some upcoming shows is, yes, we have one today. We have one on the 21st on, if you want to go deep into getting started with REST APIs and Reltio. Folks have been asking for that one for a while, so finally got that on the schedule. On the 29th, we have one around blazing trails in master data, stories from women succeeding in master data management. And then on October 12th, we have one on best practices on using LCAs and DVF. We get a lot of searches around that area. And then one I don't have on the schedule will be on the 25th, I believe, or the week of the 25th of October. And I'm working with Google and Michael Burke, and we will be talking about data quality. It'll be a nice little interview around that. So that will be pushed out in the community, hopefully this week or early next week. So Chris, I'm going to stop sharing and let you share your screen.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Hope you all had a great Labor Day weekend and are well rested and ready to take on the rest of this week. Thanks for joining us today. As Chris mentioned, this is the second really, it's kind of third or 2.5. We got interrupted during the first session and had to continue it. So this is really intended to be the second part in a series around building an MDM practice. As you mentioned, thanks for the intro, Chris. I'm Chris Iloff, Director of Customer Success here at Reltio. My experience is much like many of yours, right? Before Reltio, I came from a large enterprise organization. And back in about 2009, I believe it was, installed an MDM system and quickly had to build a practice in and around that. So very experienced in what you all are going through and trying to do at the same time. Today's focus is really going to be about kind of the after the go live piece. So we're going to dive into a little bit of that, but to add on to some of Chris's guiding principles or rules of the road, we're going to try to stay away from deep dives into technology discussions right here. So we're going to talk more about the practice of MDM. So much more the people in the process side and a little bit higher on the side of how we work those two things to make the overall practice, the application of the system itself, really, really successful across your organization. So we'll stay a little bit we're going to stay out of the weeds in technology on this, but obviously if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat, as Chris said, and we'll follow up on any of those as we go. So let's go ahead and get started. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about something that we will touch back onto some of the topics, and I'll explain for some of the folks that maybe didn't get to see the first part of the series, but it really lays the foundation, the groundwork for today's discussion to understand, the post-go live stall is what we're referring to it as. We're going to dive into mastering your pitch around MDM and why that's so important. We'll talk about how we follow the data, right? And we follow the data to get to value so that we can then illuminate the value, right? And let, again, value drive that roadmap that we have. So, for starters, Yeah, I'll explain this. This really comes from the first part of our series. It's a bit of a throwback, okay? And what we're trying to look back here is kind of how the purple line here is how we see most implementations go, right? A very technology focused, implementation around master data management being a system or almost like an application that is being implemented. Whereas the yellow line here is really kind of the utopia and the practice focused, right? And what we see here is the impactful variable here is really a continued and deep understanding of the value that MDM provides, right? From a business outcome perspective. And when we've have that at the beginning of the project, we often have it, right? Everybody's bought into kind of the business case kind of a thing. When we can continue that alignment, it's a lot easier for us to just keep growing MDM, right? So keep adding on the next few sources, keep adding on the next set of consumers, expand in new domains, if you will. All the wonderful things that you all know and want to do and have done, a lot of you, to expand MDM as a practice and to extend the value that it provides your overall organization. Goes a lot easier if we maintain that alignment to value with our data stakeholders all the way through. But that's really difficult to do, right? Especially when we focus on it as an application type of implementation. We tend to lose that focus with the business constituents and business partners. And then after go live, which is kind of down here where the arrow says limited understanding of value, that means kind of across the stakeholders, right? Your data stakeholders. And what we see here, and our data shows this actually, that when we hit this, there is kind of a lag here. There's a stall for, okay, what's next? What is the MDM 2.0 release type of thing, right? That is the additional sources or the next domain, or as I mentioned, the next set of consumers of data, the next points of integration. Those things tend to take a little bit longer than expected when we were up here and we were anticipating doing those fairly quickly at the onset of go live here. That's really the portion of continuous evolution. So when we titled this, it's harnessing the momentum to evolve, right? So today's conversation, we're going to talk about these. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you to participate a little bit, right? So please don't be shy. Are no wrong answers. This is truly a community type of environment here. We all learn from each other's experiences and we want to know those. So please, feel free to participate when prompted. And with that said, how many of you here have experienced, the purple line here? Just by like quick show of hands. Chris, you have to tell me if we're.
And I don't see any hands yet, but feel free to.
And then,
There we go.
And then, so which of you were kind of able to get out of it, and then, think about how long that took, right? Or how long that takes. And for those of you who are kind of just seeing this and understanding, the concept of this maybe for the first time, if some of you or one of you could share some feedback on how you got out of it or how long it took, or if you're kind of in there and struggling during this stall right now, feel free to.
Yeah, and you just have to take yourself off mute if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, so this is Carrie Feliciano. From my perspective, my company, we're still in it, right? So we brought in multiple sources, but really operationalizing it and having it drive more of the, I would say production systems versus, just more of a grouping for analytics purposes. So I'm also taking this as an evolution of, how we get this to work for both sides from a data perspective.
And that's a fantastic example. Thanks for that. There's, it's the analytics piece always seems like the easiest nut to crack and often gets to be the one that really funds the investment into building your MDM and your practice from the offset. And those operational use cases are always really, really tough, right, to crack into and to get integrated into. A fantastic example of that. So let's talk about then, if we know this all exists, we've got folks experiencing it, so how can we quickly get out of it, right? For those that are there, if you're up here and you're up in the top today, how can you avoid it, right? So what we're going to talk about, some of the perspectives, some of the skills and tips and tricks that we're going to share here following will help you do that, right? So they're going to help you kind of restart that engine, get out of the stall, if you will, and help you avoid it if you're up at the top and you know, just about ready to kick off an implementation of building an MDM practice. For those that didn't attend the first one, you're going to hear me say practice a lot, and you see practice at the top of the slide. So before we move on with an exercise here in a minute, I think it's important for, you know, all of us to align on that. It's something that I'm pretty, you know, pedantic about, to be honest with you, because a lot of times, as is the case with the purple line and the yellow line here, MDM gets viewed as, you know, an application, right? Just another application, if you will. But really, we all know, for those of us that are into it, it's a lot broader than that, right? It's the full spectrum of the people in the process and the technology. It's the application of it, and you know, the repeated application of it, if you will, over time. It's literally a practice. It's a lot more than just an application that you kind of Ronco, you know, you don't set it and forget it and walk away. It takes a lot of work to build it and to evolve it over time. And it's much more than just, you know, an IT solution that's in place supported by IT. So real quick, we're going to jump into an exercise here. I'm sure, you know, we're going to get to the part here where we talk about the pitch. So, and I'll share some of my experiences. Yeah, I actually remember literally the elevator pitch, right? And hearing this question a lot from data stakeholders in the business, right? My business partners that were, you know, hey, Chris, I see you're on this new thing over there. What do you got going over in data management? And, you know, I won't spoil my answer because this is what I'm going to ask you guys for here. But I'd say, yeah, you know, I'm over in MDM now, and the question's usually going to be, well, MDM, what's that? So just real quick, you know, we'll time it here, and we'll give you 30 seconds just on a notepad, you know, a piece of gum, an old napkin, whatever you got, back of an envelope type of thing. How would you answer this question? You know, let's say you're in an elevator, you know, you stumble into the lobby or something with your CMO, haven't seen each other in a while. They're curious about what you're doing. You say, I'm on this new thing, MDM, and they say, MDM, what's that? How would you answer that question to that person? Let's take a quick 30 seconds here and just jot that down. I should have had some Jeopardy music queued up, Chris.
Yeah, it'd be great. You know, just to be another piece of technology that I have to figure out.
Yeah, we'll give folks just a second here before we flip to that. All right. Now, so that was more for you, and we'll get back to that here shortly through this presentation. So normally, you know, we see kind of two types, you know, if we had to classify or categorize, you know, answers to this. I've seen this with other customers as a CSM here at Reltio, as, you know, in the role of director of CS, and even in my own job, right? I've given both of these answers in my lifetime several times, if you will, right? So when we talk about the pitch, it's kind of the ubiquitous elevator pitch scenario, right? But it really is, how do you answer that question? What is MDM? And we have a tendency, as you know, we are technical people, right? Most of us are in IT. We've been in IT for a while, and as practitioners, you know, we focus more from that perspective, from our perspective of what MDM is, right? So we tend to see, you know, what I title as like the optimistic visionary, and this is the person who's really, they're attaching it to value, but at a very high level without a lot of real, you know, meat or detail or qualification and quantification of the business value provided, right? And, you know, dive into a brief description of the practice of MDM, and then they talk about how, you know, it creates that single source of truth for the enterprise type of thing, right? Then we've got the technical guru, right? And this is kind of the answer that's really deep dive, more data management perspective. This is how you would talk to other folks in data management, really. But it's how, again, from the perspective of somebody that's an MDM practitioner, you see this day in and day out. So this makes sense to us, right? So just real quick, quick show of hands, or whichever one of the, you know, responses you want to give, smiley face or toot the horn or whatever. How many really kind of more aligned to the optimistic visionary? Anyone want to share kind of what they wrote down or how they see it, and from that perspective, if yours aligned more to the optimistic visionary? All right. How about the oh, go ahead.
This is Carrie again. So I'm definitely on the optimistic visionary side of this, and I think that the more of the tactical things as well. But one of the things I talked about or wrote down was having in built-in data quality, governance controls, as well as having a harmonized data set. Really creating that common data model across an enterprise, right, and having it work, throughout many different ecosystems. So yeah, I definitely am more on the optimistic visionary side for sure.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Anyone else like to share? Anybody, any technology gurus out there that kind of lean in that direction? I want to share feedback.
Hey, Chris, it's Matt Cook. How are you?
Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Good. Good to see you. Good to see Chris. Well, you're somewhat familiar with our implementation. We are on kind of the second go around of MDM. So my pitch has evolved a little bit. It certainly started as technology. As you said, I'm a technology guy. I looked at it from that very pure sense. But it's evolved to be kind of a hybrid of that. Again, occupational hazard, I'm still a technical guy. That is in there. But as I've evolved in my career and my engagement with MDM, certainly taking on some of that optimistic characteristics, trying to align to business value, trying to get business to own MDM. It started as an IT thing. We pushed it in as a technology solution, but certainly now trying to get the business to take ownership of it. And through our migration to Reltio, getting more engagement with the business during that migration process, they've certainly become more aware of it. We are using Reltio for operational use cases. That seems to have been the easier hurdle for us than the analytical. So we've got it involved in customer engagement systems on the web, our portals, things of that nature. So certainly my view or my pitch of it is now a hybrid. There's some great technology with a vendor partner like Reltio, the technology that you're using, leading bleeding edge stuff, which is a highlight for the business partners because they are much more technically savvy than they were 5-10 years ago. But then trying to get the business to own this so that we can align their business outcomes with what the technology can do to enable those business outcomes.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt. And one of the big key words as you wrapped up there was just one word: what. So when we look at these, let's take a look at both of these views. Both these statements are true, right? They're not false. There's absolutely nothing here that's false. The problem is we're speaking to it from our perspective, right, as technicians and practitioners. And they do involve a little bit too much of the how, right? So what we'll get into here in the next one, we'll start to inform, how do we make our pitches more about what? How do we make them state the value, right, or the business outcome that MDM is delivering or enabling in most cases, right? So again, the attachment here and the necessity for this is really about claiming that value that MDM either enables into the business or delivers directly into the business. And why is that important? Well, if we switch back just real quick to that slide, it's important because whether this is your initial implementation or not, what made this happen was that stakeholders made an investment and they decided, yes, MDM is worth it, right? This is a business case and ROI type of thing, right? It's really hard to write a business case in ROI just talking about how a technology and a practice around the technology does what it does. Obviously, it's much easier to write an ROI when you already have kind of a business value statement, right? Which consists of more of the what is it going to do? What are the outcomes that it's going to drive or produce for the business? But how do you get there? What's the trick in getting from, kind of one of these two generic kind of perspectives and to dial more into the what as opposed to the how MDM does it? Not necessarily an easy thing, but probably a heck of a lot easier than you think. It took me a while to learn this. Again, I'm dead serious when I said I've given each one of these kind of, descriptions in my career and really had to figure out, for ourselves as I built the practice, how to get through that stall, how to get through that slump. And it's just one of those things where it hits you one day that you're just not communicating pretty much like in the same language, if you will, as business partners and business constituents. And that was a real part of the breakdown. Again, the idea here is that you want this pitch, so to speak, really, to help your business partners understand why investment into MDM is a good thing, right? And to do that, they have to understand what are the outcomes that it can produce, how can it improve things for them. So again, but how do we get there? So we get there by following the data trail, okay? So we're going to spend some time on this slide. Again, Mr. Detz will pop in if there's questions popping up. I can't see the chat right now. So
quickly, there's a just comment and to Bhaskar, MDM is all about people, process, and technology. So I'd pitch based on the audience I'd be talking to. So some connects to the optimistic visionary and some connect to the technology guru. So both works fine, but I'd go with the visionary statement. It's kind of what I said. So it's a good point.
Okay.
Very
Cool.
good point.
So we're gonna dial back a little bit around. This is again, we'll talk about a couple tips and tricks, some skills here that will help you, right, glean more information to inform, your pitch, right, so that you can have several of them, as was just mentioned, that are more appropriate to the audience and to the situation, right? But how do you get that? I mean, how do you talk about value if you don't know it, right? And how do you explain it to somebody else about how your practice is delivering value when, it's not an easy thing to understand, right? We all know MDM really is a foundational perspective. I think this chart really shows exactly, how far away distance-wise, right, we tend to be from the space where value is often thought to be realized within organizations, right? Value and outcomes are driven by business process. Applications, automate and make more efficient business process, right? So that the outcomes produced that are required by business functions, are repeatable, are consistent, it's efficient to get there and do it, right? And a lot of these business apps, of course, it's all technology driven these days. And then more so with the advent of cloud and our ability to, process huge volumes at scale of data and to monetize the data to make new information and inform better decisions. All of these newer, right, or newish in the last couple decades perspectives and shift around data being so highly important really gives us kind of this perspective. And when it comes to value, it's not a direct thing. So we have to traverse a few things, right? It's often that master data is really an enabler to business process, business function, right? So it's hard for us to grab that value because the business apps are up there and they're the ones whose pictures are in the paper and names in the headline, right? And MDM, if you will, is down in the fine print in the article and people have to read about it. So how do you bridge that? So first it starts with following that data trail. And here's kind of an explanation of what that data trail really looks like within an organization. Very high level, of course, right? But we see where obviously business apps are where the business functions, the people in a business function are using different applications, they're generating application data. That application data is flowing into your practice and practices, and you're creating a set of clean and mastered, unified and connected data, right? This beautiful thing that we want everybody to have throughout the organization. And those end up funneled, if operational, back into the business apps or, and even to analytics, if we consider, data science and analytics really a business function. that would consist of that as well here. So much more generic perspective given. And this is where the value happens then, right? This is where the enablement happens. But how do you explain that? And how do you understand it? How do you get somebody to even tell you? Because it's not like it's something you can just go look up, right? You can just Google search your own internet there and see, oh, that's the value of this. So it's about, having the conversation. So who do you have the conversation with? How do you have the conversation?
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
So Carrie makes a good point. So MDM cost savings is not necessarily a quick win. What are the best practices when discussing business value that are, indirect in nature? So
great question. And that's the data trail leads to value, right? So best practices here, we've got some of the questions listed here. I'll give a quick example once we get through this too, and I think that'll add some light. But it really is about understanding from your master data here, an easy way to think of this data trail is, where is your data going? Right? Who's consuming it? And inevitably, you'll get to a point where there's a business process or a business function that's using something, right? You're sending it to a piece of technology that's putting that data into something to use it for something, right? So if we consider that something really what we're calling business apps here, it's as simple as trying to understand from that perspective, follow the data. Where did it go? Who's consuming it? And who is that who? Who are the folks there that can help you answer some of these questions, right? How do you trace it back from the business app into the broader business function with those business people, right? Your partners in the business, consumers of your wonderful master data. And so it really starts with trying to understand the business side of it, right? So you come to them to know more about their perspective, right? So this is more of a ask questions, but listen to glean information and not, come through with an explanation of your technology or your practice. So real easy way to think about it is in that business function, when you're speaking to one of your business partners that's consuming your data and using it, hey, so what do you guys do in your function? Like what outcomes are you responsible for? High level for the organization. What are the things you do to make money, reduce costs, or avoid risk? These are the three main perspectives, right, of any type of major business outcome, right, that is sought after from any business function. It can always be boiled down to one of those three things. Any questions on that part so far?
No, none right now.
All right, cool. So then we hop into where you can get a little more, granular with folks that are your partners, business app users or managers within the space, within the function, right, that are, the application owners, consumers of your data, right? So just questions like, what does their app do to support those outcomes, right? So how does their app support the business function outcomes? We're not even talking about MDM at all right now. We're talking about how they support the primary outcomes of the enterprise from their business function perspective. And now you can start to get into understanding, so how is the data I give you used in that application? Like what does it do? What are you using it for, right? And some folks will know, you'll kind of have to, they'll either direct you to the right person or you'll get that question answered in some way, shape, or form along the lines. One of the ways that you can start to unravel value is this next question here. And I'll give an example of this because it's really about kind of flipping a perspective, right? And a good way to get yourself and a lot of business folks to understand what it means to enable or deliver value is simply try to understand what happens if the data I give you is wrong or it's unavailable or MDM is not available. How does that impact, from their use of an application perspective, right? Again, we're asking for their perspective on what happens, what is this impact? And some of this takes a little bit of iteration, right? Because undoubtedly, most folks tend to go right towards, well, this screen doesn't work right, or I get this error, and we want to drive that conversation, up in altitude a little bit. And that's why we start with the primary outcomes. So now that you've positioned kind of their understanding of primary outcomes, how their app supports those primary outcomes, how they use master data. You see how we're kind of just going further down a little bit in detail. And then as we understand impact, right, it just seems to be an easy place for folks to go to say, oh gosh, well, if that wasn't there, I couldn't do this, and that means we couldn't do this, right? And it's the business folks that really know that pretty well, especially the folks in the application space. And so now you've got an impact statement at your disposal, right? And those impact statements, well, logically, they go both ways. So if not having MDM or not having accurate data from MDM is impacting how the business application helps the primary outcome be achieved in a negative way, like preventing that from happening, right? Then it's just equally as logical to say that MDM isn't enabling that to happen, right? So when MDM is working and functioning successfully, the application, right, can help assist and support the successful achievement of outcomes, right, that help drive the primary outcomes around making money, reducing cost, or avoiding risk. So you see there's still a kind of a traverse of a few steps there, right? It's a few hops, it's not one. But oftentimes I've found through experience that a lot of this kind of looking at it from an impact perspective is a much easier way to go. And obviously we've all experienced where, this is IT still, right? Nothing ever goes 100% perfect. There's always a few issues. So before I get into a story about kind of how you can do this, how you can apply it, and how I've done it in the past, any questions? Carrie, did that kind of answer your question there about getting to that?
I'm so sorry. Was that a question for me?
Oh, yeah, I was just curious. You had asked a question, so I wanted to run through, how do you get to some of the value was some of your question. How do you, direct that conversation to get there?
Yes, and
I
think the information you gave is right on. Of course, I mean, where I struggle though is, with some of the discussions around if we do this, we could, have this cost savings, because some of it is just indirect multiplied. To understand what that actual cost is a huge undertaking, right? And we can understand, by saying this data element, if it's wrong, it could cost, this X amount of dollars. However, how do I say this? You spend so much time just analyzing what that cost is, and you've already lost a lot of opportunity, right? So it's definitely a balance, and something that I struggle with, especially as, you discuss this with many throughout the organization, right? So if someone is expecting a cost savings of X dollars by, 3 months, that's a huge undertaking, right? Especially depending on how ready your business is for this as well.
Yeah, and the business readiness is really absolutely critical there, because what we're able to say in a very kind of grammatically correct way is that MDM is in enabling that, right? It's not truly delivering it, because it is indirect, right? And when we enable something, obviously you have to act on that to realize it, right? And that's kind of the part that you're getting at too, is so where is it, and where is the ownership of showing realized value, right? And what I would say to that is that's really the business's job to show the value that they're providing, right? And a good way to understand it is through value statements like the one listed, and we'll dive into that in a second. Explicitly be very clear about that kind of difference between really what is almost an opportunity cost, right, versus actually taking advantage of that. So by setting someone up and enabling them, you provide them the capability to do something, but they're not going to get the value out of it unless they do the something, right?
Yeah, Chris, and Michelle says, for us, it helps with to reduce the redundancy of entering the same data in multiple systems, which makes sense.
Mhm. So you've got cost efficiency there, right, of actual the processes of business users using those systems, so that can be expressed in the form of, efficiency, right, and use of resources. The efficiency are usually really, really big ones, right, around MDM. But again, a great way to look through it in a vehicle that we have at our disposal, but often I think doesn't get used enough, is really this question here, right? The impact. So see it from the impact perspective. If MDM was wrong or unavailable, right? How does that impact them? Now, obviously that's for existing implementations, right? But it can be brought forward from the perspective of expectations of what is the problem MDM is going to fix, right? And you can always jump to that kind of from an impact perspective to say, well, what happens when MDM is not fixing that, right? How does that impact your ability to deliver primary outcomes today? So real quick, just an example of this. I had this was, I think, a couple years ago with a customer, and they were having some issues with a point of integration, that a real-time integration that they had developed, where on their end, they were getting some timeouts, right? And we'd gone through it, coached, thought we had it resolved. It clicked back. Needed to go back in and tweak. But at some point it did get escalated on their end, as IT problems tend to sometimes, right? In the discussions around that escalation, right? I just simply asked, what is the real impact here? Like, what is the impact to the business when these requests time out? Like, what happens? And of course, just kind of like in this progression, it takes a minute. I'm talking with other technical folks, and it's, this program fails or this doesn't do that. And so it just takes a little bit to kind of wind up and get there to say, okay, and then, right? So, and then can be, sounds annoying, but can be your best friend words and the easiest question to ask, right? Where we ended up getting was that, this process is really consumed by, our overall loan application processing. And, we know that when the loan processing process, right, fails to correctly identify an individual, those loan applications are much more highly likely to fail and not succeed in actual a loan being provided, right? So, okay, wow, that's interesting. So now we can talk about that process, right? And in our discussions, it really just got to be, so tell me, what does that look like on a normal basis, everything going well, how does that loan process impact, making money, reducing cost, or avoiding risk? What's the impact there? And they said, oh, well, it's definitely, it's revenue generating, right? It has an impact on our revenue, because then those are loans that we can't close, right? And we can't make money off of those. Oh, wow, that's okay. So if Reltio, right, if your call to Reltio in this case doesn't shake out, something happens in between, and that data is not available for you to confirm the individual, and that loan application fails, that's a direct impact to revenue, and they confirm that. And then I just asked, a little more details to help, quantify it or qualify it. And I said, so what is the average, daily or monthly or what have you, revenue generated through, associated to loan applications or to loans? And what they came back with was, oh, well, man, last month we just executed this big campaign and we actually had our best day ever. And I'm not making numbers up here. This is all real life. And they said, and we served, approximately $1 billion in loan applications in a given day, right? Now, that doesn't mean they made $1 billion off of it, right? But they're going to make a percentage of that $1 billion for the loans that were given on that day. $1 billion is a huge amount of money, right? So now let's think about that. So the impact that was stated from the customer was that when I'm not able to use MDM, right, I'm much more likely to fail in providing, a loan to this person, and that's a direct impact to revenue, upwards of $1 billion on our best day, right? So when we look at the value statement here, and we understand value as a what, not a how statement, and we avoid the how MDM does it, and we just talk about the what, we're right at, again, where you can flip an impact statement to get a value statement, because logically they're just on either end of the spectrum there, right? But both are true. So if you're unable, right, to successfully meet loan applications to drive the full $1 billion, then that means your MDM practice is enabling your loan processing solution or process, right, to generate revenue of up to $1 billion a day. So these are ways that you can use an impact statement to understand what you're truly enabling for the business. A lot of times, as many of you know that aren't new to MDM, we are multiple hops away from that business. So the impact, when something unfortunately goes wrong or is perceived to go wrong or unavailable, is a point of reference to where you can start to connect those dots with your business partner on the other end. So I'll take a brief pause there. How does that resonate? Any questions or any other experiences on the line here? Similar to other people around impact?
I just thought it was a great example. Perspective to me.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, anybody else? I love the example. Anybody else have an example that they want to share? No? Okay.
So one of the keys to following the data trail, asking these type of questions, right, with your business partners, and creating this value statement that is actually devoid of how, right, being very key here, is at the same time when you're speaking in these terms, when you're building a value statement that is the what, right? MDM enables business function X to reduce cost by N. That's it. There's nothing in there that said by aggregating data and sending it back to application Y, and nothing in there about that. The key here is that the folks that are interested, your business partners that are interested in the how, they'll follow up your value statement with, well, how do you do that? And this is the opportunity to get into the how, right? Making it part of the value statement really it kind of convolutes things again, right? And it also puts things in your perspective, not their perspective, right? It's important to understand that coming to your business partners from their perspective and looking at it from their field of view, right? It shows that you understand and you know their space, you know how you're connected to their space, and you know how you can impact their space in positive ways, right? It shows that you connect to what matters most to them. You're not just talking to them about IT, right? You're talking about the outcomes that they're held accountable for, right? And you're talking about their day-to-day. So there's an empathy perspective there that's given that really helps build the relationships. And then, finally, it's a lot easier to adjust or augment or tack on to somebody's existing perspective than it is to try to wholesale change somebody's perspective, right? Oftentimes when you try to overhaul or change somebody's perspective completely, you put a wedge between you and that other person, right? So think of that from the perspective of the how. When you come to a business partner with just how MDM works and how MDM functions, and you have a technology discussion around MDM, you're really forcing your perspective of the technology and how all this should work on them and trying to change their perspective, right? Instead of trying to do that, it's fine. Take the easier approach. Meet them where they are at their perspective and tie MDM and the value that it brings to expand their perspective, right? A lot easier conversation to have. It connects the dots for them. You'll be much more successful in connecting those dots. It connects the dots for you too, right? And it's only going to broaden your perspective as well. And of course, it does help build a relationship. So there's a lot here on the data trail, right? And there's a lot to actually doing this and practicing it. It takes time, right? And it's not necessarily an easy thing. Any questions or anything here before we move on? Because this is really kind of a very kind of linchpin or critical ideology here and concept to understand as far as the data trail and the questions we can ask to get to value statements.
No questions in the chat.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to those that were in the previous session. You will probably notice this slide as well. So let value fuel your journey. So what's key to understand here is, as we look back on this one from our first session, is this is kind of a pretty version of a value roadmap, right? And you'll notice the diamonds, those all are symbols or icons for value realization, right? Or value. And what this depicts is it's a roadmap that says, add this new source because it adds this value. Master this initial entity because it adds this value. Add these interactions because it brings this value, right? But how do you ever get that done? This flips all the way back to that first slide with the purple line, right? How do you get all these things done after your go live without understanding how to sell that as with ROI as a business case, how your business partners can really sell that? And that's really the key. When we put value into their perspective terms and they can understand the value that MDM enables and delivers for them, right? Then the goal is to have them be able to say that, right? Have them make the pitch for you as well, right? So attack it from many angles, build these partners, build these coaches, build these champions for MDM by helping them understand the perspective of the value that it brings to them. And what you'll notice is that the business cases that need to be written for project X to bring in, a new analytics consumer here, right, gets funded because the business understands the value that you bring in. They can write a business case for it, right? This is how you get the investment and you get the funding for these follow-on projects. This is how you get out of the stall, right? To get out of the stall, you really require funding beyond your operational budget, right? Because many of you are out there, you're owning and operating MDM, you're keeping the lights on, but the budget you have is to keep the lights on. To do all of these things to extend the value of MDM across your enterprise, right? To build out what MDM can do and what your practice can do requires others to invest, right?
So Chris, another example that Bhaskar mentioned was, so wrong data in general, so mastered or not, has consequences, and the scale of it is subjective and varies. So for us, the impact can be, with CRM and reporting dashboards. So another example is, incorrect address for data can lead to incorrect alignment. So which means a sales rep may not see an account or HCP in their universe to make calls or to do business with. So that could be missing targets. It can be targets can lead to, missing opportunities. So it was really good. And he also says, and other classic MDM issues could be related to merges. So over merges or under merges, so both have consequences in terms of data quality. Great. Yeah, I love the example.
Yep. Great examples. And what that's a great example of too is, if we go back to the data trail, we all know that this isn't just usually not one consumer. So the point given is a great one where, you may be producing one thing, right, with multiple, business areas really consuming that, multiple business functions consuming that data to do something, what you're opening up as you follow the data trail is you're going to have multiple business partners, business consumers, as just mentioned, in that one. There's the CRM aspects of it, right? There's the sales aspects of it. So you've got multiple constituents in the business across different business functions, right? Cross-functionally that you're supporting. So tracing the data back isn't always going to be just that one-to-one thing. You're going to start to find, oh, they're using it to do this, but they're using it to do this, but they're using it to do this. And that's awesome, because at each one of those, as just mentioned, there could be different examples of things, that are impacting. And again, the impact is just one doorway in, right? It's just one little, quick tip of, hey, here's a way to open that door. Here's an easier way to get to that conversation about value, right? It's a way. There's other ways to have that conversation. You may end up having people that just understand it, right? Not highly likely, but again, it's not the only way. I'm not saying it's the only way. It's a way. It works. It works really well, which is why I added it here, and it's fairly easy, right? So, but great commentary and great examples there. So just as,
well, I think that's, and just to
go
say this, I think that's important. You've got to know what problems you're trying to solve. I mean, Bhaskar just mentioned some great examples, and it's real life. Like we need to hear more of those kinds of things. What problems is it solving? What are the outcomes, or what is the potential risks? That can happen. So very nice.
Exactly. And
got me really excited. So,
and that's exactly what we, the key here is that perspective, right? The perspective of the folks consuming your data to provide benefit and value to the organization, the folks in the business, meeting them in their perspective and expanding their perspective to include how MDM helps them do that. And that's really, the nuts and bolts and the foundation of getting value, or getting the value to fuel your journey, right? Is the value gets people to understand why they should invest, and that investment helps you build out the MDM practice that delivers value across your organization. So I know we're probably close to the end here, and feel free, we can open for questions for the next few minutes, Chris, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Commentary, discussion, I'm available, whatever you guys need.
Again, if you want to stop sharing your slides, and if some questions come up, then we'll be here for the next 3 or 4 minutes. But thank you everyone for coming to today's Reltio community show. Chris, thank you for sharing that. I thought it was a little bit different. We've been doing some different shows, more kind of at a higher level on why MDM, how to build a practice from ground up, how to talk to different stakeholders. And to me, this is kind of what it's about. We'll continue to do technology stuff and go deep in the technology. The last thing I'll say is that whenever you leave this, there will be a survey that pops up. So please feel free to take that. It only will literally take you probably 3 minutes. So really appreciate it. Any questions, thoughts before we go? Thanks, Carrie. She said this is a great content and appreciate the discussions. We'll continue these as we move forward as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, I think one key takeaway I want y'all to have is, at some point, I know y'all got busy days going on. Take a look at how you answered the MDM "what is it" question that you wrote down, if you wrote it down, and just with a little bit of what we shared today, maybe think about how would you answer that now? How would you be able to answer that if you're able to, right? How does it change how you answer that once you have a perspective of how you can really tie MDM to how it delivers business value?
Yeah, Bhaskar mentions that in his experience, there's no magic button to fix all issues overnight, right? MDM is still about fine-tuning match rules, merge rules, survivorship rules, and it's iterative. Keep fine-tuning them until they get better, especially data stewards. They play a crucial role in the success of any master data management solution.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And again, it's important to understand how those issues and how your fine-tuning impacts all the people that are using that data to make things better for the business.
Yeah.
Great examples, Bhaskar.
Also need for data governance.
Yep.
Maybe that's a discussion. I like that point. data governance discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get into that. I have some experience there as well. So,
And then one comment: we're early adopter of MDM. It's not been perfect, but we're really happy with it. It's great. It's great.
oh, well, thanks, Trito. I'm happy to help you with. Been using it for 5 years.
The early adopters. They've been doing it for 5 years.
I hope this has helped a little bit. And if I'm always available, feel free to shoot me an email if you want to understand better how you can do some of this, how you can incorporate some of these tactics and techniques into your experience there. So happy to help out.
We're always trying to listen to needs, so thank you for pointing that out. And thanks, Matthew Cook and Carrie, for all of the comments and discussions. And Chris, this is great. We'll do it again. But thank you, everyone, for coming. In a couple of weeks, we do have another show, so make sure you go take a look. I'll be sending out invites shortly. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and we'll talk soon.
Have a great day, everybody.